The shooting range. In this episode, Pages of History, the British Octane War, Round Study, the T-80 BVM Endurance Test, and Metal Beasts, the Italian Nailgun. Besides a wide variety of tanks and anti-aircraft vehicles, most nations also have another important tech type. The Red Skies update introduced one to Italy too, and this one sits at the BR of 9.0. Please welcome the Dardo, which in English means an arrow or a dart. Its main weapon is a two-plane stabilized 25mm gun with elevation angles between -10 and +60 degrees. It also has a machine gun and a couple of ATGM launchers. The gunner can enjoy the convenience of a thermal imager, while smoke launchers provide additional protection. The engine compartment is situated in the front, next to the driver, and the other two crew members sit in the turret. What does a perfect IFV need? Well, for starters, mobility. And mobility it has. More than enough to take a good position before the others get to it, or retreat under the cover of smoke before it gets too hot. 30 kph in reverse is a speed most tankers would dream about. What else? Weapons, of course, and the bigger the better. Traditionally, this class has an autocannon and guided missiles, and this machine is no exception with its 25mm APF SDS rounds, although with that caliber, it's more akin to darts. Just look at them. Barely bigger than the regular nails. Maybe we should shop for ammo at a convenience store nearby, huh? Well, size aside, these rounds can still destroy enemy tanks with ease, especially if you consider a fire rate of almost 560 rounds per minute. It can penetrate most Western MBTs from the front. As for the Soviet tanks, the bottoms of their sides are vulnerable as well, even with good sloping. The missiles on the Dardo are just as good, since you can research the roof-crushing TOW-2B ones, capable of hitting even those out of sight or behind cover. Now, armor. The Dardo's armor is pretty special. Thanks to the sloping, the upper glacis is invincible to autocannons. The engine is installed in the front. Add to that a nice amount of armor plates on the inside, and you have chances to survive even a tank APF SDS round. Still, though, we don't recommend trying that in battle. You'd best avoid the enemy's sights. Now, what else should you keep in mind? The ammo pool for the autocannon has 4 belts, and reloading takes 8 seconds with an ace crew, which means that you need to glance at your ammo count from time to time so that you could spend the last rounds in a belt while you're in a safe place and continue your assault with a fresh one. By the way, the commander doesn't have their own sights here, but they can still do the shooting if you lose a gunner and survive. And of course, since it's an IFV, it can use all the benefits of the light tank class, helping with repairs, extinguishing fires, and active scouting. With the onslaught of the Second World War, the Royal Air Force found themselves in a challenging situation. Their air engines were losing the race for power and altitude. And how were the Allies doing? Hey Americans, how do you do? Our industry is capable of making thousands of turbochargers. What engine problem are you talking about again? Hey Russians, do you have that problem? Our skies are always gloomy, so we fight the Luftwaffe on low altitudes with our frontline aircraft and quick fighters. Well, maybe the Germans aren't doing that well then? They invented an injection of water-methanol mix with nitrous oxide to help engines climb higher. The Royal Air Force had none of those things. On top of it all, their engines had lower volumes. The Soviet M105 had 35 liters. The German DB605 had 36, while the poor Merlin had only 27. You can't cheat physics. With all other factors held equal, lower volume means lower power. The Rolls-Royce engineers were deep into developing the Griffon with a better volume, but the Air Force needed it ASAP. What could they do? Well, the only thing they could do right away was to increase the octane number for aircraft fuel. And that's how the famous British 150 grade fuel was invented. It was often used as an argument for the superiority of the Royal Air Force over the Luftwaffe. But in fact, it was a rather desperate measure, something you do when you don't have anything else left. Now, what is this grade or octane number? It shows the anti-knock quality of the fuel. When it's too low, the fuel can self-ignite at the wrong time and cause a shockwave inside the piston, which may stop or even destroy the engine. The higher the octane number goes, the more compressed fuel mix can go into the combustion chamber. More fuel mix, more intense burning, more power. Sounds simple in theory, right? Well, in practice it meant a whole tank wagon was needed for a single Lancaster squadron before a bombing raid. And the Air Force had hundreds, even thousands of planes. They needed tons of fuel, as cheap as possible and as soon as possible. They'd no time for a long, expensive, multiple-stage distillation process to get that high-octane fuel. So instead, they used anti-knock additives with what petroleum they had, showing little care about how safe or eco-friendly they were. They were also adding a special redolent substance to make air fuel stink. Why? Well, if you can smell it next to the plane, run! Or put on your hazmat suit and look for a leak, assuming you have one. And even if you do, how do you work in a hazmat suit in the heat of Northern Africa, for instance? How do you put it on in case of an unexpected battle alarm? Where do you get one if you're a pilot and the fuel is pouring into your cockpit midair? Engineers, mechanics, pilots, aerodrome workers, most of those who had contact with the 150 grade fuel or inhaled its fumes never made it past the 1960s. Their battle was fought with cancer and cirrhosis as the enemies, and their lives are part of the sacrifices made for the victory. Thanks to that desperate measure, the Hungry Air engines always had enough inexpensive fuel. By the way, more than 2/3 of the modern petrol cost goes towards the anti-knock additives. They've become much more complicated and expensive, but at least they're much safer. The T-80BVM has one of the best protection ratings among War Thunder's MBTs with its ERA plates, composite armor, and low profile. But there's no tank without a vulnerability. Let's check how well it can endure the popular 120mm Heat FS rounds with a penetration rate of 480mm. The most vulnerable part is the lower front plate. There's barely anything besides the rubber screen here. If you hit it, your round is highly likely to incapacitate the driver or ignite the fuel tank. And if you're lucky, the explosive jet can even hit the ammo racks. Another vulnerability is the driver's optics. Delivering a blow right into the glass will incapacitate the tanker sitting right behind it and damage the turret's horizontal drive. If you manage to angle the hit a little, you can even get a chance to hit the gun breech and the tanker in the turret. Let's take a look at the mantlet and the turret's front. A Heat FS round will have no issues penetrating the armor here, damaging the gun breech and hitting one of the crew members in the turret. the turret roof around the gunner's optics is vulnerable too, with a similar outcome when breached. Now, how about the DM-33? Yes, there's the DM-53 with a better penetration rate, but the DM-33 is more popular, and as we've already checked, can be employed against the same vulnerable areas. Some of the vulnerabilities on the T-80 will be the same as with the Heat FS, but the damage might change significantly. For instance, if the penetrator goes through the lower glacis, it won't stop on the driver, instead going all the way through the ammo racks and into the engine. Chances of surviving that are basically non-existent. If an AP-FSDS round hits the optics, it will inflict much more damage than the Heat FS too, damaging the gun breech and the engine, hitting the driver, and maybe even another crew member in the turret. And here's a new vulnerability: the turret ring. Even if you shoot at it straight from the front, one of the crew members might get hit. If the round hits it from the side, there's a good chance of damaging the whole turret. There's another vulnerability on the turret roof. This area here, above the semicircle of reactive armor wedges. It's a very convenient guide for aiming. The damage you'll inflict will depend on what part of the roof you hit. Another good round to use here is the HE type. For instance, the Chinese MBTs have them. The simplest way to destroy the Soviet tank with HE rounds is to aim under the turret's reactive armor to damage the hull's upper plates. Alternatively, you can shoot for the optics. When the round penetrates the turret roof, the explosion will incapacitate everyone inside the machine. Finally, you can try to send your HE round under the tank. It's tricky though, since the lower glacis is covered by a rubber screen, with that scenario in mind, to keep the high explosive rounds away from the thin armor. If your enemy has lost the screen in battle though, they're defenseless against that shot. Well, now let's leave our poor T-80 alone for today. It's been a round sponge for a long time. We need to answer some of the questions you ask us in the comments. The first question was sent by a player called Commander Meeseeks. Can we get a challenge of which tank has the slowest turret traverse? Hi, Commander Meeseeks. Speaking of tanks only, the slowest turret traverse speed belongs to the American M2 and the German Panzer III, with only 3.3 degrees a second in stock. But there's an even slower machine if we go wider. The American M10 tank destroyer. Its traverse rate is 2.7 degrees per second. Arielis Mirones asks, what is the difference between the Tiger H1 and the Tiger E? Hello, Arielis. The main differences include the engine power, the gun mantlet armor, and the commander's cupola. The modification E also got rid of the hull launchers that often got in the way of gun depression on its predecessor. Another question comes from Lucy the Saurium. Best way to use A32A? Hi Lucy. The fighter is best in mixed battles. Its bomb load and flight performance are good enough to engage both ground and air targets. Owen Carey writes, what is the bulge found on some of the main guns of modern tanks? Hey Owen, it's a passive device called a fume extractor. On the inside, it looks like a cylindrical pressure reservoir connected to the barrel with valves and a ring of holes angled towards the muzzle end. When a round passes the valves, the propellant fumes fill the reservoir at an extreme pressure. When the round leaves the barrel, the pressure difference pushes the fumes towards the muzzle end at an angle, taking the fumes in the gun breech with them. And the last comment for today was written by Gallimimus Animation. Idea: add duels to War Thunder, so basically 1 versus 1 duels that you can challenge your friends to any vehicle random map. Hi there. It sounds like a nice idea, but the game has difficulty levels and other battle settings. Creating a dual mission for each set of parameters is too complicated, but you already have an option to create your own custom battle and invite anyone you want. Well, how quickly we've ended it for today. You've been watching The Shooting Range by Gaijin Entertainment, and the next episode will premiere the following Sunday at 4 p.m. GMT or noon Eastern Time. Subscribe and click the bell if you don't want to miss our next videos. Don't forget to check your fuel, any Octane you can find. Leave a like, share your thoughts and comments, and, of course, I'll see you next week.